In today's video, I'm going to tell you what happened with Trump, because 99% of Americans don't know what's going on. I'm going to explain the new plan. Whether it's going to work or not is up for debate, and you can be the judge of that. Here's the situation. The United States of America is in a serious debt crisis. The federal government is in debt of $37.2 trillion. So how did this happen? It's quite simple. The government has a bad habit of spending more money than they have coming in. Here's the total debt building up to 2024. 2025 hasn't finished yet. I'll show you that one when it's available, but I assure you it's going to be more horrifying than this one. How do you spend more money than you have coming in? The answer is easy. You borrow money to fund your overspending habits, and you go into debt. How does the U.S. government borrow money? The government borrows money by issuing U.S. Treasuries, Treasury bills, Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. If you want to lend money to the U.S. government, you can purchase a Treasury, and the government will pay you interest. You can buy them, banks can buy them, institutions can buy them, foreign governments can buy them, anybody can buy them. Now here's the big problem. The government needs to borrow a huge amount of money, $1 trillion over the next 12 months, $9 trillion to refinance old debts, and another $2 trillion on top of that to fuel the overspending. They need to sell $11 trillion of U.S. Treasuries. But what's going to happen if there aren't enough people willing to lend money to the U.S. government? Then the government is going to have to offer a higher interest rate to attract enough lenders. It's simple. The U.S. government will auction off $11 trillion of Treasuries, and they'll hope enough people buy them at an interest rate of around 4%. But if there aren't enough people willing to lend the government $11 trillion at a 4% interest rate, then the government will have to offer a higher rate. Maybe 4.25%, 4.5%, 5%, or even 6%. If there's not enough demand for U.S. Treasuries, then the interest rate will go up. That's not good for the government, because if rates go up, then the U.S. government needs to pay more interest expense to service the debt. Remember this. On $37 trillion of debt, if the government has to pay just 1% more in interest, that would mean $370 billion more each year. To put that in perspective, we spend about $850 billion a year on national defense. It's not a small amount of money. Initially, President Trump's plan to solve the debt crisis was to balance the government's budget. Trump had a campaign promise of reducing spending, balancing the budget, and paying down the national debt. To spearhead the initiative, Trump put Elon Musk in charge with Doge. Elon Musk aimed to reduce government spending by $2 trillion a year, which would have been an enormous feat considering the government spends about $7 trillion a year. Musk said they had a good shot of cutting $1 trillion. However, cutting spending by massive amounts would be problematic. Here's why. Federal government spending is a big component of our economy. If we massively reduce government spending, then we would likely have a severe recession. GDP includes government spending. If GDP falls drastically and we enter a recession, then the government collects less tax revenue, and that makes the debt crisis even worse. Debt to GDP would go through the roof, with consequences for the US dollar. Not only were there economic complications, but there was political pushback against Doge as well. Politicians and inside beneficiaries wanted the money to continue flowing. Not to my surprise, Doge was an epic and colossal failure. If you look at the official Doge website, which is on the government's website, you might be tricked into believing Doge saved us $25 billion. That's supposedly over the course of 10 years, which is about $2.5 billion per year. The savings figure includes estimated and hypothetical savings on long-term leases and contracts. I don't even believe that $25 billion number to begin with. Many of the savings were either lies or errors. The smoking gun? Look at the deficit. Up to July of 2025, the government's overspending was worse than the same period last year. They didn't cut $2 trillion or $1 trillion. Overspending has gotten worse. Trump's original plan failed, so he came up with a new one. The federal government has to refinance $9 trillion and raise a new $2 trillion on top. Will there be enough demand for treasuries to soak up all this supply at lower rates? Most people, including the government, believe there won't be. They know they have a problem, Therefore, Trump needed a way to increase demand for treasuries. Otherwise, the government would have to offer a higher interest rate, which means higher interest payments. Here's President Trump's new plan, and you can decide if it will work. The Genius Act passed in Congress, and Trump signed it into law in July. Trump is supporting cryptocurrencies in order to create more demand for treasury bills. Here's how it works. Let's say you want to buy Bitcoin. First, you exchange US dollars for cryptocurrency. For example, you sign up for a crypto exchange and buy $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. $100,000 leaves your bank account, and you now have $100,000 worth of Bitcoin in your exchange account. Now, Bitcoin goes up by 20%. You now have $120,000 worth of Bitcoin. You don't want to cash out to dollars, so you hold the value in stablecoins. A stablecoin is a digital representation of a US dollar. Under the Genius Act, each stablecoin must be backed by either US dollars or short-term treasury bills. What does this achieve? It creates more demand for treasury bills. If the crypto market grows, more stablecoins are needed. More stablecoins means more demand for treasuries. More demand keeps interest rates lower, and the government can borrow at cheaper rates. But will this create enough demand to make a difference? The crypto market right now is worth about $4 trillion. Stablecoins represent around $280 billion. Some say that's not enough to matter. Others argue the rapid growth of crypto could make it significant. This could increase demand and lower interest rates for short-term treasuries. But what about long-term treasuries like 30-year bonds? One solution would be for the Federal Reserve to step in and buy the bonds. But that would be seen globally as a sign of desperation and would accelerate de-dollarization. Therefore, this would be the last option, or hence, the Fed is buyer of last resort. Now, this is where gold comes in. I'll give you two scenarios. First, Trump could issue gold-backed treasuries. Don't confuse this with a gold standard. This would be bonds redeemable in gold at maturity. For example, you lend the government $4,000 and in 30 years, they repay you 1 ounce of physical gold. It would be a zero-coupon bond convertible to gold at maturity. Why would the government do this? They could raise desperately needed money immediately and avoid interest payments since the bonds are repaid in gold. This idea comes from Judy Shelton, Trump's former economic advisor. Shelton was nominated to the Federal Reserve in 2020 but rejected by the Senate because she was an advocate of gold, something the Fed dislikes because they can't print gold. The second scenario, revalue the government's gold reserves. The U.S. Treasury officially reports 8,133 metric tons of gold, equal to about 261 million troy ounces. On the books, it's valued at $422 per ounce, but the market value is above $3,400. If Trump revalues gold to market value, or even higher, then the Federal Reserve must print the difference and give it to the Treasury. Many expect Trump might revalue gold to $15,000 per ounce. That would give the government $4 trillion instantly. That's $4 trillion less in treasuries to sell. Trump could use that money for his initiatives or to pay down the debt, claiming he fulfilled his promise. This isn't far-fetched. The U.S. has done it before, and it doesn't require congressional approval. Trump could do this whenever he wants. Many expect he might around America's 251st anniversary on July 4th, 2026. This debt crisis threatens us with higher interest rates, which is a major fiscal challenge. But it also impacts Trump's initiative to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Rebuilding factories, and infrastructure requires financing. And that isn't feasible with high interest rates. So what do you think? Will Trump's plan work to tackle the debt crisis? I'll end with this. Trump's ideas for crypto and gold are not solutions. The federal government has an overspending problem. Crypto and gold are just ways to buy time and keep the show going. As this unfolds, we'll keep you updated on the situation. Please subscribe. Thank you for your support, and I wish you a very nice day. Take care.